First and foremost, I want to congratulate Tottenham Hotspur for beating Man United in the Europa League final. It definitely was a matchup of two clowns going at it, but nonetheless, they were the deserved victors on the day. This was a massive accomplishment for the club, but for me, considering what has happened over the last 2 years, it begs the question of what happens next for Spurs. See, for a few days, the club had reached the massive level of euphoria. After 17 years without a major trophy, they locked in, beat everyone in front of them on the way to the final, and managed to secure themselves a European trophy before stage 1000 Arteta. Following this, the streets of North London would finally be in celebration mode as over 200,000 people hit the streets for Spurs' trophy parade. But once the dust settled from all the celebration and drinking that the Spurs players were participating in, the reality of the situation at Spurs began to creep back in. Because yes, it was a massive feat for this club, which had been considered a laughingstock across Europe's major leagues, to finally come out on top. But what they had to sacrifice on the way there was what really left people confused as to what was even going to come out of this. I mean, after all, Spurs pretty much became the worst club in the league when not accounting for relegation bound sides, as they finished in 17th place and also failed in their other domestic competitions. Additionally, the situation between the club and Ange Postecoglou had recently felt like it's one small incident away from reaching an impasse. Neutrals and even Spurs fans since the finals seem to not be able to put a finger on where the next campaign might go for the club, and what really solidified this was the fact that on the final Premier League match week, which happened after the Europa League final, Spurs would get pounded out by Brighton 4-1, securing them their record 22nd loss of the season, making the club the first ever team in Premier League history to suffer 22 defeats and not get relegated. Truly record-breaking stuff from this Spurs side. But for me, today, I wanted to touch on Ange's 2 seasons at the club so far and what might be next for the champions of North London. And real quick, boys, if you're new to the channel, enjoying the video, enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We are dropping weekly football videos, so make sure you hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel, boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Make sure you guys let me know your thoughts on Spurs this season, what's next for them, and what you think about Ange Postecoglou in the comments down below. But with that being said, boys, let's get into what the heck is going on at Spurs Football Club. Of course, as many great scholars have said, before we look at the future, we must look at the past. I don't know if any scholars have actually said that, but it sounds smart enough to me. So Ange Postecoglou would come into Spurs at a very turbulent time. Like I mentioned, it had been 17 years since their last trophy, and it reached a point where Spurs were in ultimate desperation mode, and it led to them reaching near rock bottom. After failing to capitalize on their most successful period with project manager Pochettino, Spurs brought in Mourinho in 2019, who albeit was a little bit washed but still considered a serial winner. In his second season at the club, he would get them to the EFL Cup final before falling out with the board and getting sacked literally just before the final. Spurs would remain trophyless and the desperation continued. And following the sacking of Mourinho, Spurs would bring in another Portuguese man in Nuno Espirito Santo, who was coming off revitalizing Wolves. He, however, would crash and burn and was sacked months into his tenure. With Spurs in a panic, they would try to go down the serial winner route again and brought in Antonio Conte into the club. Well, surprise, after just 2 years, Conte would fall out with the board, and his departure would see another big name manager leave the club trophyless. All these circumstances eventually leading to a door being opened for a certain Australian manager who had just won a treble with Celtic. And so on June 6, 2023, Spurs would announce the appointment of Ange Postecoglou. This was an interesting one, as he definitely felt like more of a project type of manager, especially when comparing his resume to past Spurs managers, and because of this, there was a little bit of a stigma that perhaps he was trying to do a job that was maybe too big for him. But Ange would come into the role ready to make this club his own and to replicate the style of football that had already brought him success in Australia and at Celtic. Very aggressive, pressing, and high volume attacking football. Spurs 100% knew what they were signing up for with Ange and tried their best to back him during his first transfer window. Mind you, Spurs historically have made their managers suffer because they would just not scarf up the cash and back them when they needed it the most. Well, for Ange, his first summer would see the club bring in Brennan Johnson from Forest for 55 million euros, Jay Madison for 46.3 million euros, human lightning bolt Mickey van de Ven for 40 million euros, Pedro Porro for another 40 million, Vicario for 18.5, and Dejan Kulusevski for 30 million. Many great talents would be crucial to any success the club might see, especially considering the fact that they were joining the likes of Christian Romero, Heung-min Son, Udogie, and Bentancur. There was a chance for Spurs to make something out of the season. And following the departure of Spurs legend Harry Kane, it was always going to be difficult for the attack to be as efficient as before, but Spurs had at least put that money into key places to boost the squad overall. And really what kind of transpired from here would really just be a very typical Spurs season, especially on paper, as they would go on to finish in 5th place with no trophy to boast for another year and extending their trophy drought. They would lose in the 4th round of the FA Cup and in just the 2nd round of the EFL Cup. But of course, there is a nuance as to how their season played out, notably in how Ange actually approached the season to begin with. Because if we're being honest, a 5th place finish in the Premier League after coming from Celtic is pretty impressive, I can't lie. Especially considering that for a few weeks, Spurs were actually in 1st place and that after match day 13, they never actually dropped lower than 5th place. So for that, you can applaud the guy. But at many points throughout the campaign, he really shot himself in the foot, notably because of the fact that he never wanted to change the way that he played. See, Ange likes to play a very high line, and this was in full effect his first season. The match against Chelsea early in the campaign was what made everyone take notice of how quickly this system could cause a team to drown, because after Spurs took the lead in this match, Romero received a red card, but despite being a man down, Ange still decided to run that high line and pretty much got killed the rest of the match. And throughout the rest of the season, Ange would stick to exactly the way he liked to play, even if his main back line was out through injury. Thus, they would periodically suffer, with Ange refusing to change anything about his system. In a season that could have potentially brought a top 4 finish for Spurs, Champions League football, and maybe domestic trophy, Ange's system caught up to them and it pretty much just left them disappointed by the end of it. So now, going into this season, there was hope that Ange could figure things out, maybe make some tweaks, maybe learn to adapt here and there, and maybe something special can happen. And when he dropped the coldest quote of the year, there was definitely a belief that things could finally come up Spurs. And in the summer, Daniel Levy would continue to back Ange as they brought him a proper number 9 in Solanke for 64 million, and other pieces in Archie Gray for 41.2 and Odebert for 29.3 million. Realistically, there was no way that Spurs was going to win a Premier League trophy. That's probably not going to happen for a really long time, and that was never the expectation for this season. But could a trophy finally be coming Spurs' way? Maybe. That was definitely the hope. Well, and yes, eventually the trophy came, but the journey there was not pretty, and that is essentially what has so many people split on what the heck is going to happen with these guys. Because Spurs this season, like I mentioned, went on to have a historically terrible run. A combination of Van de Ven and Romero being out nearly all season, other players like Solanke, Vicario, Mikey Moore, Odebert, Richarlison, Bentancur, Udogie, and Madison all facing significant time out, Son seemingly see all his abilities fall off a cliff, and Ange's system becoming less viable in the Premier League led to Spurs finishing in 17th place with just 38 points. Like I mentioned, they literally became the first team in Premier League history to finish the season with 22 losses and not get relegated. They didn't even cross the 40-point mark. They came up short in both the EFL Cup and the FA Cup once again, and overall were an embarrassment the entire season domestically. And yet, as the season went on, they found themselves going further and further and further in the Europa League, eventually making the final. The final where they would face off against United, where a stoppable force faced off against a movable object. And at the end of the 90 minutes, Spurs, who were the much-deserved victors, would finally break their drought and acquire their 3rd Europa League title, despite everything that had happened domestically. And really, after such a weird campaign where players were out, Ange was getting exposed, Tottenham was getting slapped up every week, they made the final, they won it. After all of this, one of the main reasons why this win amongst everything that's happened this season has left so many people confused on what's going to happen next for Spurs is the fact that towards the tail end of the season, there was already a lot of murmurs that Ange and the board were not getting along, and that the Europa League final would be his last game managing the club, win or lose. And at this point, nearly a week removed from the final, Ange still finds himself in charge with nothing really being solidified in either direction. At the moment, it's very unclear if Ange is still going to be at the helm when the next season kicks off. It's all good winning a major trophy after such a long time, but these guys literally finished 17th place and by a miracle did not get relegated. Mind you, this is one of the very few teams in the Premier League that I could say did worse than Manchester United in the league. Somebody has to pay for this, and it's still very unclear who it's going to be. And let's just say, for argument's sake, Ange is destined to be the manager for next season, right? Let's just say he keeps the job. At the moment, it looks like all his rivals are gearing up to get ready for the next season and come back stronger. Arsenal have been linked with multiple number 9s as this is their biggest missing component. Liverpool have already signed Frimpong and seem likely to get Wirtz. Chelsea have the arrival of Quenda and Estavao to look forward to, and even Man United, who lost the final and doesn't have Champions League football, has signed Cunha and is linked to other players like Mbeumo and Delap. And yet Spurs are kind of just stagnant so far, and more than likely it's probably because they don't know what to do with Ange yet. Even then, you have sections of the fan base that are split on whether the guy should stay or go. You have Cristian Romero, who is backing Ange with everything he's got, and you can't imagine he's the only player that feels the way, which begs the question of what happens with the players if they sack Ange. And so there's all of these factors that are going on with the club. We have no idea what direction they want to take the club in. And again, let's say Ange does stay, right? What happens with the squad for next year? The Champions League is a lot more demanding compared to the Europa League, and as we saw this season, this squad is not capable of managing 4 different competitions and staying competitive in all of them. If anything happens to the center backs, this team is gonna die. They might just die unless they sign good depth. And even then, from a player's perspective, it's reached the point where things need to turn around at the club from a consistency standpoint, because domestically it cannot get any worse than it got this year, because that would literally mean the team gets relegated. Anything other than a finish amongst the top 6 is gonna be a massive failure, especially considering the fact that the club is probably gonna make some high value signings that they need to be able to bankroll in the future. So if they miss out on Champions League or European football, they might be cooked in the long run. I just can't help but feel like at the very moment Spurs are walking a tightrope, with disaster being on the cards should they fall. It's either they sack Ange Postecoglou, the squad goes into turmoil, they reset with a brand new manager after having just won the Europa League, but then they have the benefit of someone coming in who isn't going to lead this team to 17th place, or they keep Ange and hope he improves, but that's not going to be necessarily a guarantee. Now they have Champions League football they have to focus on, which is a whole nother can of worms. But look, 100% Spurs should be very happy that they won the Europa League. Massive achievement. The fact that they have Champions League football is great. Son is back in the Champions League. They have Solanke. They have great pieces to go into the Champions League with, but I'm just kind of concerned for what might be next for these guys, because it's very unclear at the moment. I don't even hate Spurs like that. Of course, people meme them and stuff like that, but there's no reason for me to really hate Spurs. But they just need to get things together, because we don't know what the heck's gonna happen. And if you kind of compare that to United, who also had a disaster of a season in the Premier League, heck, we came in 15th place. Losing the final was kind of a blessing in disguise. Fans realistically were able to see that a lot of the players are pretty much just not good enough, and are already calling for pretty much a majority of the team to get sold. It's kind of forced the club to move a lot quicker in the transfer window. We already signed Cunha, we're linked to other players. Who knows if we get them or not, but just the fact that they're moving so quickly is a positive sign. Whereas with Spurs now, because they won the trophy, maybe it's causing more questions in the back room, maybe it's causing more questions from the board to see if Ange sticks around or not. So now it's just all unclear. Hopefully for Spurs fans' sake, things kind of clear up and there's a little bit more of a direct trajectory, but I guess time will tell.